Okay, hi Allison. Thank you so much
Hi.
for joining me here today on Vonvo.com. It is March 2nd, 2013, and we're going to have a discussion on the Palestinian hunger strikes taking place. I just wanted to go over two quick things before we got our conversation started. The first is that right now this conversation is being recorded, and after the recording is complete, I'll be uploading this conversation to YouTube. Is that okay with you?
It is.
Great. And then on top of that, here at Vonvo, we're all about having civil discussions and valuable discussions. So we don't want there to be any personal attacks on anyone in case someone happens to join our room, which is quite possible since there's two spots remaining. Are you okay with those ground rules?
I think those are excellent.
Okay, perfect. So then let's get started with our conversation. Just for all of our viewers who are watching right now and who might watch in the future, would you mind just giving a quick background of yourself, what you do, and how you got so passionate about this subject?
Sure, I'd be glad to. My name is Alison Weir. I'm Executive Director of If Americans Knew, and I'm President of the Council for the National Interest. What happened with me, and I'll just try to do this quickly, but 13 years ago, I did not know anything about Israel-Palestine, like the general American, since I'm not Jewish or Muslim or Arab, and like many of us, I have not paid much attention to it most of my life. I got curious about it when the Palestinian uprising began in the fall of 2000. Began to follow the news coverage. My background is journalism, and I noticed how one-sided the coverage was. As I looked into it more for myself, I grew increasingly shocked at what I thought and still think actually is one of the biggest cover-ups I've ever seen, perhaps the biggest cover-up. So after a few months, I quit my job as a very small town editor, and traveled over to Gaza and the West Bank as a freelance reporter in February and March of 2001. I traveled around with my notebook and my camera, saw what was going on there firsthand, and when I came back, I started the organization If Americans Knew, just to try to give people the information on this issue in a non-doctrinaire way, a non-partisan way, a non-political way, just more in a journalistic way to get the information out.
Great.
So, and part of what we do is monitor the media to see it, why and in what ways it's so badly flawed in its coverage of Israel-Palestine.
Great. So, could you, we had our first Palestinian hunger strike discussion 2 weeks ago, and then we had one last week. Or we actually had two last week. This is our first one of this weekend, and we're just still, kind of penetrating this subject. Would you mind just giving us a bit of a background of what this topic is all about? Because it's something that, I think you'd probably agree doesn't really get any media coverage, so therefore not many people, probably know what it is about.
That's right. Well, the basics are that thousands of Palestinians are held in Israeli prisons. Many of them, in the range of hundreds, have never even been charged with a crime. They've not had any sort of trial. They aren't confronted with charges so that their lawyers can even refute them. And they just sit in Israeli prisons, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades. Others have been convicted, allegedly, of a crime. But again, the system is very much a kangaroo court kind of system. So many Palestinians that are supposedly found guilty of a crime have signed confessions in Hebrew when they don't even speak Hebrew. So so basically we have thousands of Palestinians, including women and children, hundreds of children, in Israeli prisons. Periodically, now the ones that are supposedly guilty are what most of us would call resistance fighters. The Palestinian territories are occupied and regularly invaded by Israeli military forces. When other groups have done this against the Nazis, for example, or against other occupying force, they're called resistance fighters. And that's what most of these Palestinians are. Some of them, many of them have used nonviolence, some of them have used other ways. But anyway, so we have this thousands of Palestinians being held in prison. And again, to emphasize, many without even having been tried are just being held under really abysmal conditions.
Right.
Torture is frequent. So to catch up with what's going on now is that through the years there are frequently hunger strikes by these Palestinian prisoners to try to improve their condition and to try to bring awareness to what's going on from the outside world. Right now, there are several hunger strikers in prison who are approaching some of the longest hunger strikes in history. They're far longer than Gandhi had ever done. They're longer than any of the Irish hunger strikers who died from their hunger strikes. So they're very significant hunger strikes. About 2 weeks ago, a little over 2 weeks ago, I wrote an article specifically about one of them named Samer Issawi, who at that time had been on a hunger strike for well over 200 days. I think it was, it was over 6.5 months at that time. Now it's even longer than that. And the focus of my article was both on this prisoner, his hunger strike, and especially the fact that a hunger striker, somebody who's been on a hunger strike for over 6 months is a newsworthy activity. And yet, in all of that time, the Associated Press had never even reported about this man's hunger strike.
Right.
Similarly,
Continue for sure. Sorry. Sorry.
That's fine. So that to me was shocking. When there was one Israeli prisoner who was held by Hamas in Gaza a few years ago, for several years. He was an Israeli tank gunner, a soldier who was held by resistance forces. As it turned out, not really mistreated. No one wants to be held. So it's not to minimize how horrible that would be to be imprisoned. But he was clearly not tortured, and when he was released, he was really in pretty good health. So anyway, this young Israeli had been the subject of numerous news stories throughout the U.S. media. Many people knew his name. It was widely known, widely reported. And yet here we have these thousands of Palestinian prisoners who are rarely even mentioned, certainly almost never by name. The children are not mentioned, the women are not mentioned. Here we had a hunger striker on a hunger strike for over 6 months, not mentioned. I found that shocking. I also wrote about the fact that Amnesty International, which many of us respect, and we think that it will tell us about these types of cases, and yet Amnesty International also had not been issuing alerts about Samer Issawi very long hunger strike. So that was sort of the basis of my was writing that particular article about the situation.
Right, and so ultimately, do you have any answers to why you think places like the AP weren't providing any coverage for this, and since it's been going on for over 200 days now, what the reasoning behind the continued I guess ignorance of the topic? What's the purpose for that? Do you have any suggestions?
I do. I have some factors that I suspect are pretty significant in how Palestinians are covered in general and this situation in particular. The AP system of reporting around the world is to have several bureaus in a region. And one of those bureaus will be the control bureau through which all the news is sent to the main American headquarters, for example, which is in New York. As near as I've been able to determine, and AP will not answer my questions, maybe other people can ask them, maybe they'll answer yours. There seem to be 2 major bureaus in Israel that are staffed largely by Israeli journalists and Jewish journalists. And there are 2 bureaus in the Palestinian territories that are staffed largely by Palestinian journalists, Christian and Muslim. That sounds like a good system, actually, because it seems that in all four of those cases, in the two Israeli bureaus and the two Palestinian bureaus, those journalists will be plugged in, they will speak the local language, they will be very embedded in the local population, and therefore will get us the news. The problem is that that one of them is designated the Control Bureau, and that bureau controls all of the information that we back in the U.S. receive on the issue. And that Control Bureau is located in Israel. So this means that, for example, if we were getting reporting on maybe the, Serbia-Bosnia conflict, and we had Serbs giving us all of our information, one would expect that there could and would be bias in what was reported, how it was reported, what was considered newsworthy and not. And that's what we're getting with Israel-Palestine. We are not hearing from a neutral bureau. We are hearing from a bureau where people are living and part of one of the populations that's in conflict. And I think that's very likely to be one of the major causes of this kind of major omission in news coverage of Israel-Palestine.
Right. So do you have any, in regards to then, you mentioned the, like the legal system and, people who have come on Vonvo, they use the term, he's in, he's in detention, right? Administrative detention, something, is that the proper term?
That's right.
Right.
Yes, administrative detention is when they have not even been charged with a crime.
Right. And so what basically, legally has have these hunger strikers been, what rights have they been given? I mean, ultimately the choice to not eat is, on their part, right? So it's not like the administrative detention is Israeli prison not giving them food. That's on their end. What rights are they being denied of that, you would suggest, are really seem to be unfair?
Well, they have actually very few rights. They're mistreated in prison regularly. This has been exposed by some media since the 1970s. The London Times had an excellent article about torture in prisons. They don't have the right to see the evidence against them. In this case, what seems to be the case, it's a little fuzzy because Israel, sort of hides behind these Kafka-esque kind of so-called legal system. But for example, what seems to be the reason that apparently they are holding this man, Samer Issawi, is because he was part of the prisoner release that came a few years ago when Gilad Shalit, the Israeli tank gunner who was held in Gaza, was released. In return, there were 1,000 Palestinians who were released. This man, Samer, was one of them. Apparently, Israel said that he would be released on the condition that he was not allowed to leave Jerusalem. Now, I don't know if they had the right to make that kind of condition on him. I'm not sure whether that condition was actually made, but that's what they're saying, and it may be the case. Now, what Samer Issawi's supporters are saying is that when Israeli forces took Samer Issawi, he was inside what Israel designates the Jerusalem municipality. So, according to his supporters, and I have not seen this disputed, he was actually within the municipality of Jerusalem. So even that sort of vague charge seems very questionable. So here we have a person that's in danger of dying. When you've been on a hunger strike that long, there are, of course, major health consequences. His heartbeat had slowed way down at times, perhaps it still has. He'd lost about half of his body weight. He could barely walk. He was in a wheelchair, and he still is in a wheelchair. He's in the hospital. So under those conditions, I'm not a doctor, but doctors seem to say that it's a heart attack or a stroke or some sort of fatal result could occur at any time. And to have that occur because someone allegedly did not leave, went outside the borders of the city when he most likely actually was within what Israel says the borders are, is a tragic situation and one that more of the world should know about, because I don't think we want somebody who, as I recall, I think he's 33 years old. This is a shame. This is a tragic thing. The world should know about it, and something can and should be done about it. If we were aware of it, if Americans knew that we give Israel over $8 million per day of our tax money. We give Israel more of our tax money than we give any other country on earth, more than all of sub-Saharan Africa gets combined. We give to Israel per capita about 10,000 times more than the average amount of U.S. aid abroad. So it's a massive amount of money. It makes us very, very much a part of this issue, and we should be fully and accurately informed on it. And that's one of my major objections. We're not getting full information on it.
Right. One of our listeners who was inside the text chat asked if he could join. Noam, are you there? Because I don't see your picture. You don't see Noam, do you, Allison?
No, I see the name, Noam S.
Right, yeah, Noam.
But I don't.
Noam has participated on Vonvo in the past. I don't know why I don't see him or hear him right now, but... Noam, are you there?
Noam, are you there? Yeah, 1 second, please.
All right, put in some headphones if you have.
Okay.
Okay. Right, and Allison, while we're waiting for Noam, would you mind addressing the idea behind, the Gilead Shalit exchange of prisoners, like the concept of exchanging one prisoner for 1,000, Palestinian prisoners. I guess if you're looking at it from an Israeli point of view, which Noam actually happens to live inside of Israel, so this will be a good, mix of views here. What is your take on on that sort of swapping and that amount of exchange? Like, do you think that? Would you mind just maybe giving us your insight onto that? Because I've yet to ask that question to anyone.
Yeah. Well, let me see. I can look at. We actually have a lot of the statistics on Israel Palestine. We have on our website, ifamericans.org. So I'm going to actually go there right now and get the number of Palestinian prisoners that are being held currently, as of at least. We update these figures every few months, so this could be a little bit out of date, but it'll be pretty close to what's going on now.
Hey, Max, Alison?
Yeah, no, I hear you.
The number of prisoners held right now in Israeli prisons is 4,656 Palestinians. So, in other words, the Palestinians turned over 100% of the prisoners they held in this exchange, and the Israelis turned over about 20% of the prisoners that they held.
Right.
From an objective point of view, that was actually the Israelis came off far better, because now there are no longer any prisoners held by Palestinians, whereas Palestinians still have thousands of Palestinians being held by Israel.
Right. Noam, are you there? And do you hear Allison okay?
Yes, I hear fine.
Allison, do you hear Noam?
I do.
Okay, so Noam, did you have a question or comment, that you wanted to run by Allison?
Yes, about Samer Issawi, El Issawi. He was 26 years ago. He was going on trial on shooting accident. Not an accident, a shooting at Israeli citizens. And he got jailed for. No, I'm sorry. He got jailed for 26 years, and he released on the Shalit deal, okay? And he got arrested again because he did he didn't do what the agreement says he should do. You understand me?
Yeah, we hear you. So go ahead and.
I actually. I just have one question. I couldn't quite hear. I thought you said that he was arrested. How long ago?
No, I'm sorry. I was confusing. And let me tell you. I don't know when was the first time he got arrested, but the punishment was 26 years in jail.
So Alison, when was if just to go into the history of Samer, when was he originally arrested, and do you know what the charge was then at that time? And then I'm assuming he wasn't in that administrative detention then, right? He was actually in real jail at that time.
It was 10 years ago. He arrested 10 years ago and got 26 years in jail.
Yeah, he was arrested. Apparently the charges, and again, remember this is a system where it's pretty stacked against the prisoner. If you're a Palestinian prisoner, it's very much stacked against you. But apparently his crime, allegedly, was possession of weapons and forming a military group. And for that he got sentenced to, I thought it was 30 years, maybe it was 36 years. So he was sentenced to 30 years for possession of weapons.
Right. And so, on that front, Noam, I mean, like, you live in Israel, Noam, so from your point of view, if someone was, arrested and charged with 30 years for just, having, let's say, weapons on them and hadn't been used on anyone, and we don't know if they were or not, would you say that, your Israeli government is providing, like, justified sentences for some of these Palestinians? What's your take on that, Noam?
If it was only for possession weapon, he got 26 years. So I think it's wrong. Okay, but I don't know exactly the all details of this case. But I'm sure he had a fair trial, like everybody else. And I don't know. I need to learn the subject on this person. I don't know exactly what's going on over there, but if it's only for possession weapon, it's wrong. But I'm sure it's not the case.
What it seems to be is possession of weapons and, quote, forming a military group, whatever that means.
Yes. It's not that is related to a terror organization. He's a member of a terror organization that...
Actually, forming a military group is not automatically a terror organization. There are military targets, of course. So, let's use terror with precision. Forming
so he's using a military force inside of Israel. So it's not okay either.
Well, I guess we don't know that. We don't know where this was done. We don't know what kind of military.
This is why you had the trial. This is why you had the trial, and you had the judge and your lawyers, and they made the justice for this case.
So, Alison, do you go ahead, Alison, respond, and then some people are submitting some questions in the text chat that I'll ask you afterwards.
Sure, and there are people that would have more expertise on this case than I would, but and perhaps at some point they can join in or be a part of another chat. Again, there's a great deal of evidence that the court trials in Israel of Palestinians are enormously unfair. People are convicted for signing confessions in languages that they don't speak. They have often been tortured during their interrogations. All of this has been widely documented by a number of sources, including Israeli human rights organizations. I'm just curious, Noam, have you not heard of any of that?
Yeah, sure. I heard about hunger strikes of the prisoners, but you make some disinformation. All in Israel, the official language is Hebrew, Arabic, and English. So all of the official documents of the government are in Hebrew and Arabic. So when we got to trial, everything is in Arabic also. They don't speak only Hebrew. They write and speak Hebrew and Arabic.
Are you unaware of the torture that's used against Palestinians that's been documented by numerous groups? Is that something you're just ignoring, or have you actually never even heard of that?
By law, something like 20 years ago, the Ministry of Laws in Israel decided that by law it will be forbidden to torture prisoners in the army, by law. And because we are a state of law, everybody needs to obey the law. And if somebody don't obey to the law, they will be punished.
Well, there's massive documentation that this goes on all the time. Before the High Court in Israel finally decided to make it, to a degree, against the law, not fully against the law, Israel was the only country on earth that actually legalized torture. It finally, I think, was so embarrassed at that situation that it did, to a degree, outlaw it. But it still goes on. It's frequently described. It's frequently documented.
Give me an example. I don't know. The only what going on, what started all this issue about torturing and prisoners was the Kav 300 story. Do you know this story? When a group of terrorists hijacked a bus with civilian people, killed them all, not all of them, but most of the bus. There was regular citizen taking the bus inside Israel, and after the Shabbat, I think, the army controlled the bus and took the terrorists. I think one of them was died. Some press take a picture, and after a few days, they say that he was dead in the takeover of the bus. This is open as an issue on the prisoners. What you can do, what you can do, and then the law after this case, the law was established very very clear about what we can do and what we can't do. I don't think the law in Israel can let you torture or kill a prisoner. It's not true.
Well, I guess I'm not sure what year you were talking about. Could you just tell me what year you're discussing?
Let me. I don't remember. I need to search.
So Alison, while
you're looking into that, maybe I should mention, since a number of times you keep using the word terror, the person who bragged about introducing terror to the Middle East was the Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. In an interview with an American journalist a number of years ago, he was asked, what does it feel like to have introduced terror to the Middle East? Menachem Begin replied, not just to the Middle East, to the world. The first groups to commit terrorist actions and to be terror groups targeting civilians were the Irgun and the Stern Gang. These were very violent groups before the State of Israel was formed. They played a significant role in creating the State of Israel. This is true. True violence is intentionally targeting civilians, which was done by these pre-Israeli forces decades before Israel even existed. To go into more recent examples of torture, and a Palestinian prisoner just died recently in an Israeli prison. His name is Arafat Jaradat. He was another young person, and the evidence suggests that he was tortured. Now, again, the the system that Noam insists is fair, but most independent authorities find is enormously unfair, had an autopsy committed on this prisoner who just died tragically. And the man who conducted the autopsy was named Yehuda Hiss. Yehuda Hiss I'm somewhat familiar with because I looked into him for another article I wrote several years ago. And again, no one should know this because this comes from the Israeli media. He had been found guilty on a number of occasions of taking organs. This man was the chief pathologist for Israel. He was in charge of the Israeli morgue, the official Israeli morgue, and he had all sorts of organs that he had, without authorization or permission, taken from bodies in his care, including Palestinians. So this man, who has been found having removed and stolen organs from bodies, is now the person who did the autopsy on the Palestinian prisoner. This is not the kind of medical official that I find trustworthy.
Right. So there's been a number of people who have posted some items inside of the text chat, and I kind of want to I want to ask you one specific question that Doug posted a few minutes ago that, I guess has somewhat relation to the organization you run, Alison. He goes, what does Israel getting money from the U.S. have to do with the Palestinians being arrested? What's your take on? Is there any sort of connection with that?
Well, the connection is that because we give so much money to them, it's essential that Americans be informed about Israel and Palestine accurately and fully. This is not, it's a huge world with many, many important issues around the world, many tragic cases around the world. But specifically, when this is the nation that receives more U.S. money than any other nation on earth, more U.S. weaponry than any other nation on earth, holding a man prisoner without really, apparently, presenting him with real charges about his case, not a trial, in which this man has a major hunger strike, one of the longest in history. This is a newsworthy item for the American public because Israel is the recipient of such a massive amount of U.S. governmental support and U.S. tax money. Makes it a very, very newsworthy situation, and it's very disturbing that it's not being covered by the American media. The way it would be if this were an Israeli citizen held by, this has never even happened, but if an Israeli prisoner were held by Palestinians and had been on a hunger strike for 6 months, it is impossible for me to imagine that would not have received major news coverage.
Right. So, Noam, what's your thoughts on that direct comparison that Alison's making? Do you think that she has a point there, and do you think that if she does have a point, that there might be something something might be flawed? I guess either in the media system or whatever we want to call it. What do you think about that, Noam?
I just want to ask Alison a question. If a group of prisoners in the state, murderers, rapers, thieves, I don't know who, will go to an hunger strike in U.S. prison, you will show much sympathy as you shown to the Palestinian prisoners in Israel?
I'm sorry, it was a little difficult understanding you. I think you were asking if people in an American prison who had been convicted of rape or murder were on a hunger strike with people. Is that what your question was?
I question if you show the same sympathy to the prisoner in the United States that convicted by law, by the justice system, go to an hunger strike.
Thank you. Now I do understand your question, and actually, there are a number of points to make to that. First of all, this is not a man who is convicted for murder. He was not convicted for rape, so that's not even close to an equivalent situation. However, to give you the answer, in the U.S. there are people that have been convicted of murder, and there is a great deal of support for them to get a fair trial and not to be executed. So I think in the U.S. there would be sympathy, and at least there would be reporting on a major hunger strike. And I'm sure it would get mixed reactions. But this is, I'm not sure why you made a comparison that's really illogical. This is not a man that was convicted of murder or rape. This is a man who was charged.
I just gave an example. I didn't say it did.
Well, then let's get if there were a person in the U.S. prison system who had been convicted under a questionable trial for possession of a murder, for possession of weapons, and this person were on a 6-month hunger strike, I think there would be a great deal of sympathy and support, and certainly awareness of that situation and discussion of it.
But he didn't convict only for possessing a weapon. He had another.
Yes, the other charge I don't keep repeating because it's so unclear to me. Forming a, quote, military group. There are people in this country who are part of militias. As you know, I'm sure you're aware of this, the Palestinians are under occupation. Most of the world, according to international law, finds this occupation illegal. The actions being conducted by the occupation military forces are frequently illegal. So this is an illegal system that Palestinians are being held under. As you know, Israel has an extremely powerful military. It's in the top 10 most powerful militaries in the planet. Probably, many people say it's the 4th most powerful military in the planet. The Palestinian population has very little power compared to the Israeli government and the Israeli military forces. It's been occupied. The West Bank and Gaza have been occupied since 1967. The Palestinian population in general has been occupied since 1948, when there was a massive ethnic cleansing that took place, in which at least 750,000 men, women, and children were violently expelled. A portion of that group remained within what is now the state of Israel, but again, in many of those cases, these people are not even allowed to return to their homes, even though allegedly they're Israeli citizens. In many cases, they're called present absentees. Their homes were confiscated, given to other people, and they're not allowed to even live in their own homes or in their own villages. I've been to some of those villages in Israel that were Palestinian villages, Christian villages, and Muslim villages, that the Palestinian Christians and Muslims that live in Israel are allegedly Israeli citizens, and yet they're not allowed to live in their own villages. This is a bizarre system.
Right.
And it is not surprising that people would object to it.
Right. So Alison, there's 2 questions that I wanted to address. Since we're kind of on the subject, do you in regards to occupation, Doug poses a question suggesting, so let's see here. Can we focus it? In regards to going back to the hunger strike concept, because that's what we're here to discuss. Let's see. Do you think that what do you think ultimately needs to take place to prevent these sorts of mistrials and misaccusations from continuing to occur? I mean, what would you say needs to really take place immediately to have these hunger strikes end? Do you think that these people need to be immediately released, or do you think that they should actually stand a real trial if they're being held in this detention? What is your take on that?
Well, I think that there should be a transparent, fair system. In the case of Samer Issawi, he's basically being held on a parole violation that is an extremely minor one. I think that should be addressed fairly, and I suspect he should be released. So I think that my view is he should be released. He should be aware of this. And in other cases, there should be a more public, transparent trial. I think that Americans should become more aware of it. Let me see. I'm trying to look at and see what some of the specific demands are by the various hunger strikers. The demands vary, and I'm sorry that I'm not. Anybody can Google this and look into There's a lot of reporting on this in the Palestinian media. IMEMC.org would have some of the latest information. MAN News, that's MAAN News.org. Both of these I have English language websites that conduct the specifics of these various cases.
Right.
So I think people can look into it and find out more of the specifics for themselves.
Right, and one question that came up last week that was really interesting to note. I don't know what your take is on this, but like the idea that the PLO or Mahmoud Abbas, I think we asked one of our speakers last week, what has he or any of the Palestinian authorities been trying to do about this? And the answer from the speakers was like absolutely nothing. Do you have any idea or reasoning behind why that would be the case? If this is an innocent, prisoner right now?
The internal politics of Israel and Palestine, for both systems, aren't things that I spend a lot of time focusing on. There's sadly a history of in case of the Palestinians, of the leadership needing to make deals with Israel to be able to retain their leadership. They could be criticized for this. Other people could say this is the reality of them. Basically, it's important to understand that the Palestinian leadership, including Mahmoud Abbas, they're in a prison. This isn't really much of a leader who has really very little control over his own destiny. Israel controls the borders of Palestinian territories. It's a major military power. It held, the previous leader, Yasser Arafat, was held virtually prisoner for many months, being starved out by Israel. When Israel decides to, it cuts off the money to Mahmoud Abbas. So these are people without very much power, basically. And sadly, they have a history of taking actions that many of us feel are not the actions that one would expect leaders to take in supporting their population. But again, they have, given the limits of their power, maybe this is all he thinks that he can do. Maybe he's trying to negotiate with the Israelis who control his power, trying to get something out of them, and therefore, will do little on behalf of the Palestinian prisoners because he's trying to negotiate something. Maybe the Palestinian Authority is trying to negotiate something with the American government, and therefore they're, as part of this negotiation, they will not stand up for the Palestinian prisoners. Maybe they think that they are able to negotiate something useful. To me, the power dynamics are so skewed against the Palestinians that they don't have the power to negotiate. And to me, it would be far better for them to stand out fully in support of Palestinian prisoners and others in ways that they're not doing. But this is, again, others can speak to that probably in more detail.
Right. Noam, did you have anything to comment on, or otherwise I can, move on into another question?
I understand that the support of Alison in the Palestinian prisoners because she don't believe in the Israeli justice system. I'm correct?
That's correct. Unfortunately, I think it's a very flawed system when it comes to Palestinians. For Israeli citizens who are Jewish, it might be a fair system. No system is perfect. Certainly, I'm not going to say the American judicial system is perfect or completely fair either by any means. But I think it is. I think the Israeli system, according to all of the evidence that I've seen, and I've looked into it quite a bit, is very skewed against Palestinians. And I'd be surprised to think that you're not aware of that.
You need to understand you don't separate from Jews to Palestinians. You separate. You have law inside the state of Israel, and you said before that the Gaza Strip and the West Bank is occupied by Israel. Gaza is not occupied by Israel, and the justice system over there, it's Hamas justice system. And in the West Bank, in the Palestinian territories, we don't have law over there. The law is the PLO. PLO is responsible to try everybody over there. But when... what?
That's actually not accurate. Gaza is, even though the Israeli illegal settlements were finally removed from Gaza several years ago, Israel still largely controls the borders. The only border it does not seem to control is the Egyptian border. The Egyptian border, however, is regulated in a way that Israel tells them how to regulate. For example, there are medications that are needed in Gaza right now. One of the types is some medications that are very important for children are not present in Gaza in sufficient amounts, placing Gazan children at serious health risks. The reason that these are not there is because they have to go for some reason through Israel. Israel has told Egypt not to let these medications go through. Therefore, they have to go through Israel, and Israel doesn't allow them to. So Israel still largely controls the border of Gaza. Israeli forces also invade Gaza frequently and injure and beat and sometimes kill people in Gaza frequently without any consequences. So Gaza is still very much occupied. The West Bank is completely occupied, and even though the Palestinian Authority has some responsibility there and some power there in terms of policing the local population, again, Israeli forces invade the West Bank whenever they want to, which is several times a day. They beat people, they kidnap people, they injure people, again, with impunity. This is a population that's being held prisoner by another population. I've been there, I've seen it. I've been in nonviolent demonstrations where Israeli forces come into a village that is not part of Israel, beat people that are taking part in a nonviolent demonstration, shoot them with rubber bullets, as they're called, which is really steel objects coated with a thin coating of rubber, and sometimes with live ammunition. This is what it's like in the occupied territories. And Noam, you're clearly old enough to have served in the Israeli military, since there's universal compulsory military service. It's hard for me to believe that you're not aware of these conditions. They're reported in the Israeli military. Some of the best reporting on this is by, again, I'd like to make clear that some Israeli journalists are doing an excellent job of what's going on and are reporting this in the Israeli military, in the Israeli newspapers, Haaretz, even the Jerusalem Post. Both of these are very pro-Israel newspapers, but they do carry quite a bit of information about the occupied territories. So this should be widely known in Israel. I think it looks like we're almost at the end of the time that I was expecting to be on this.
Yeah. If you have some other things, coming up, on the rest of your day. Not a problem at all. We're approaching an hour that we've been speaking. So Alison, ultimately, thank you for discussing this subject with us, and for your time. And we'd love to have you back on to dig deeper into this subject, as well as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Middle East, whatever it might be. So that we can continue to drive valuable dialogue and discussions here at Vonvo.com.
Thank you. Thanks for having this and for providing this kind of forum. I think it's very valuable.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Yeah, for we're trying to improve that whole journalism and media sense. So we're hoping to continue to drive more discussions similar to this.
Great. And I guess I would just urge people to go to the two websites that I have. One is ifamericansnew.org, where we have a lot of information, and also Council for the National Interest, councilforthenationalinterest.org, that also has a great deal of information about Israel-Palestine and about the American connection to it.
Okay, great.
Thanks. I guess if it's all right with you, maybe I'll sign off now.
Yeah, not a problem. Thank you so much, Alison.
Thanks.